Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Changemakers Bite Size, brought to you by SA Partners. Today, I'm delighted to welcome back Andy Brunskill for his second session with us here at Changemakers Bite Size as a retrospective look at his time as an interim factory manager. So, Andy, over to you. Take it away.
Thanks, Jordan. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Turn the Ship Around. This brief presentation over the next 30 minutes or so is really me sharing my experiences of an interim factory manager role that I unexpectedly started to do at the beginning of this year. Originally, I was to go in for a 6-month period until they could recruit the appropriate operations director for the position. I ended up actually doing 8 months, and I've called it "Turn the Ship Around" because the "Turn the Ship Around" was published in 2013, and it's based on a former naval captain, David Marquette's true story. And many have applied his insights into their own organizations, creating a workplace where everyone takes responsibility for his or her actions, where followers grow to become leaders, and where happier teams drive dramatically better results. And Marquette was a Naval Academy graduate and an experienced officer when he was selected for the submarine command. And he was trained to give orders in the traditional mode of know all you tell type leadership, which I'm sure we're familiar with. And he faced a new challenge when he was shifted to the Santa Fe, which is a nuclear-powered submarine, obviously facing the high-stress environment of a sub where there was little margin for error. And he was determined to reverse the trends he found, and those trends were poor morale, poor performance, and the worst retention rate in the entire fleet. And almost immediately, Marquette ran into some trouble when he unknowingly gave an impossible order, and his crew tried to follow it anyway. And when he asked them, why did you do that? The answer was, because you told me to. And Marquette realized that while he had been trained for a different submarine, his crew had been trained to do what they were told to do, which is a deadly combination. And that's when Marquette flipped the leadership model on its head and pushed for leadership at every level. And Turn the Ship Around, which is a great book, which I'd recommend to read, reveals how the Santa Fe skyrocketed from the worst to the first in the fleet by challenging the US Navy's traditional leader-follower approach and struggling against his own instincts to take control. He instead achieved a vastly more powerful model of giving control to his subordinates and creating leadership. And before long, each member of Marquette's crew became a leader and assumed responsibility for everything they did, from the clerical tasks to crucial combat decisions. And the crew became completely engaged, contributing their full intellectual property every day. So what happened to the Santa Fe? Well, the Santa Fe set records for performance, morale, and retention over the next decade. And a highly disproportionate number of the officers of the Santa Fe were selected to become submarine commanders. Now, This short case study highlights my 8 months of experience as an interim factory manager. And let me, first of all, the factory that I went to manage is and was a very well performing factory. It wasn't anything like the Santa Fe, but it certainly had challenges. Okay. And my 8 months experience was as an interim factory manager, helping stabilize the ship and steer it in the right direction until a suitable director of operations could be sourced. It's the story of how a food company with a fantastic growing range of offerings and how their business excellence journey recognise the importance of tapping in to people's potential and also getting the ownership through there. So as I said, I'm going to talk through 3 main themes. The first one I'm going to talk about is the use of strategy deployment, or the use of the tier management system to engage everyone in the organization and create ownership. The second theme I'll talk about is creating a dynamic problem-solving system and a culture to eliminate problems. And then thirdly, the recognition of poor standards and creating a mindset to strive for excellence and not to accept poor standards. So let's have a look at the first theme. So just as another little bit of a sort of run into this, SA Partners and a number of my colleagues had been working with this particular company for a good period of time, 6 months or so, before I actually, and that's where where this opportunity arose. So we'd been in helping support this company on the manufacturing excellence journey, and they had put in a tier management system very similar to this graphic you can see on the left, which was based on a sort of 4-tier structure. And it's a classic 4-tier structure that starts with a sort of tier 1 at senior management level, tier 2 middle, tier 3 supervision, tier 4 and tier 4X. And what they had done, they'd done pretty successfully. And the idea is that they developed a cadence of a weekly tier 1 meetings of the senior management team, daily tier 3 meetings, and there's an example of the initial T3 board that we had, which would take place on the shop floor in a specific location on the shop floor with middle management and supervision. We'd have 2 what we used to call T4X meetings that would take place on each of the shifts, so AM shift and PM shift and the night shift. And we would have daily line review meetings. And the system that I came into was going to ultimately be owned by myself for my tenure as the factory manager. And it was working okay, but it was evident pretty early on that there were some things that were working well, and we can see them there. Production feedback. So it was a great means of communication. In terms of communication of issues and opportunities, that was working well across the shifts. People's adherence to time was pretty good. We were getting real-time data capture, so we were getting the OEE on a daily basis. There was no delay in getting some of the quality information. We had people attending, the right people, so we were getting updates, and there was an opportunity for discussion. There was some stuff missing, so there was a requirement for some input from other departments that wasn't always forthcoming. They hadn't really recognised the right person to run the meeting, and very quickly, literally after a couple of weeks, I decided that I was going to chair this tier 3 meeting on a daily basis, which I did for a number of months until we decided what the cadence was going to be. We needed to revive the action board. We had a number of daily actions, and I'll show you how we did that. And we had a number of actions that were longer term, but that needed some life breathing into it. And again, sometimes the meetings would go on longer, so there needed to be a need to take discussion offline. And timekeeping could be an issue. You know, the meetings could last anything from the cadence, which was allowed of 15 minutes to 20 to 30 minutes. What wasn't working well, a few things I've already talked about there, taking too long. We had some issues with respect. We did have some issues with some behaviors of individuals in terms of the way that they would challenge people and the general sort of good behaviors we would expect in this environment. We had new people who were training. Sometimes the correct information wasn't brought, and the feedback process wasn't necessarily working. There are other things put in here because this was something we did with all the members. So we got some people who said, "Oh, we haven't got any chairs to sit on," and the location had some issues just in terms of the air conditioning. Okay. And there were a number of people who didn't feel that they necessarily needed to be there. And then what can be improved? We talked about the info feedback to T1, T2, targets for data, moving discussion to relevant groups, better communication. Now, the point now, and I won't go through all of those things, is that what that did is it allowed us to start to address some of those issues, because the meetings and the cadence and the system that we had in place in theory based on this, and I'll go back to it. If you think about it, it's this process here that we're trying to do with the strategy in terms of everybody knowing what they are responsible in their area, and the problem solving piece being that we can solve problems at the right level in the organization. Because one of the things that was certainly happening at this organization when I joined was that we were solving problems at the wrong level in the organization, which ultimately meant that the people at tier 4, the line teams, weren't actively getting involved in solving the grains of sand and those problems. And we had people effectively working one layer lower in the organization than where we sat. So it was really important to have this review. And these are just some of the things that, and again, this is an evolving process. And, since I left at the beginning of August, there'll be other reiterations of this, but this was about 2 specific meetings, which is the T4X and the T3, which were deemed to be the ones that needed some changes. To do with the charge hands taking responsibility to make sure that we got daily OEE figures, and to make sure that the correct reasons for downtime breakdowns were brought, because what we didn't want to be doing is having conversations where we don't have the right information, the right quality information, and also making sure that we had the right information regarding quality issues and non-conformances. And we all set, then the other thing we did is we set targets. So some of the targets that were set when I joined, we decided we're going to put in our overall equipment effectiveness targets, and we'll code them red if not achieved, green if achieved. Okay, and that will help us focus on what we need to do. The T3 meetings, again, similar processes in terms of one representative would go who had been on the T4X. We didn't need all the people who were on T4X going to the T3, because the T3 was a larger cadence of people. And it is the responsibility of each department to make sure that the data that they owned was brought to the meeting and discussed, because we did have issues with data wasn't brought. And the format would follow the listed KPIs. And the other thing, as I mentioned before, because we had a debate around, there was a bit of a rota that was put together for people running the T3 meeting, and really there was it wasn't working. So I decided that I would run the meetings for a period of time until I'd set the standard until the end of March. And that is something that I managed to achieve. So that's a little bit about the team management process. I'm going to now talk about the next system of work, which is, because why do we do tier management? We do tier management to have the right conversations. That's why we're having a tier management process. We're having the right conversations at the right level so that effectively people are engaged and they create ownership. We're not having tier management as an excuse to push something somewhere else. So an ineffective tier management system is where we're escalating from one tier to another tier, things that we could have done at that tier. So there is a challenge there that says if something comes from a T4 to a T3 or a T3 to a T2, and the T2's first question would be, why haven't they done that at T3? So it is not an excuse to pass on issues. It's where you need to escalate because you don't believe you have either the resources or the capability or whatever it may do. So one of the things was really important was to create a dynamic problem solving system and the culture to eliminate problems. And this was key in that, and these are two, just as we all know there's many problem solving techniques that are around, and we started with simple 4-step process: problem solving, gather the data, understand the process, identify root cause and develop solutions, implement and monitor solutions, which is fundamentally for problems that we don't know the cause. And then the one on the left is the classic 4C. We have a concern, we know what the cause is, we put a countermeasure, we put a control in. So part of the tier management meeting was to actually identify, and 80% of the issues identified would just go on the simple 4C board. What's the concern? What's the cause? What's the countermeasure? Who's going to do it when? And there's a review. Some of them would be 24 hours. Some of them may be more than 24 hours, and it would go on a short to medium term. But this was the problem-solving methodology that we put in place. And I'm just going to give a little example. So this is just one example of the sort of thing that would pop up where we'd get issues with. I better show you the problem statement. So we've got issues with the plastic swath of a bottle, which is contaminating the neck. It's something that was actually ended up we're having to put one person doing 100% manual inspection. And once we've done a problem statement, which you don't see here, is we've established we've got about 2.5%, which is considerable. Okay. So we're following our 4-step process. We've mapped our process. And again, we're following it all the way through. So we're looking at the caps coming in from the supplier. We're making sure that the specification is correct. And when we talk about specification, people often don't actually see the machine as the customer and say, what does the machine value in terms of those caps? So there's an additional customer value piece of work that the team have done here. And as you can see from here, having mapped the process, they've done a Ishikawa or fishbone, looked at some of the potential causes, and then we've taken those top causes, taken them through 5Y. Obviously a couple of those we've been able to get to root cause with 1Y and a couple with 3Y. But as a result of that, we have set some actions in place around, and this is an interesting one. The caps are too cold, and that was causing swath. So we need to acclimatize the caps. The correct descent settings on the capper, and settings not being put in on the system and retained so that we can go back. So there's some examples of centerline. So that's just one of many examples. And lots of examples on the 4C type approach as well. The third area where I'm going to just talk about, and which was again part of my experience having ran the factory for a period of time, was that this was a very different company than the Santa Fe as a ship. It wasn't a failing ship. It's a growing business. It was doing really well as a market leader. Fantastic people. Lots of new investment going in. But there was, and they would be the first to tell you, a problem with the acceptance of poor standards. Now, I'm sure many of us have seen these environments where we'll walk past poor standards, and after a while we could become accustomed, and we effectively are conditioned to accept poor standards. This was key in the recognition of poor standards and creating the right mindset to strive for excellence. And again, just one example that we did for this was there were a number of lines and making manufacturing facilities. As I said, I'm just going to choose one of these, and we did a number of these, and you know, still lots of progress. And the guy, I know for a fact that the guys will continue to do this, and they're doing this across a number of their lines. But I actually used the 4-step TPM model, which obviously I was the creator, or one of the creators of that, which is looking at 4 cycles: the measurement cycle, the condition cycle, and the problem prevention cycle, and the sustainment cycle. So the immediate reason why we looked at the portion packet is, if you look at the current OEE levels, we were averaging 50%. Now, 50%, simple maths says, if I run that machine 10 shifts a week, at 50%, I'm only actually getting 5 shifts worth of product out. Okay, so the first thing we did was our classic best of best type, where we dive in and we look at the figures. What was the best availability we've had over the period of the last period of time? And that was actually 82. What's the best performance? 83. We weren't measuring quality, which was another issue, but quality effectively is a yield measure that should be measured for this, because it's making sure you have the right metric that you're measuring. And as you can see there, there's a loss analysis of the 6 equipment losses, which I won't go into detail, but there's quite a lot around breakdowns. Setups and changeovers are independent ones, where there was a separate changeover optimization project running at that, but a number of issues. When we then gone into the condition cycle, okay, sorry, I missed a point there. So when we look at the best of best, we came out with a figure of 68. So there's a considerable difference between best of best and 50%, but we'll have a look at where we actually got to when we realized. So we had a team, operators, maintainers, supervision. We did a criticality assessment on which is all part of cycle 2 on the portion packer, and then we did a condition appraisal. And these are just pictures of the team doing that. And why are we doing this? We're doing this because we want people to become equipment conscious. Here are some of the condition photos of many that we had. As you can see, the way that change parts are stored isn't great. It's only going to cause damage. And then when we do a change and we put a different product on and we suddenly realize we've got nozzle issues, the reason why is because they're broken, or they've been damaged, and they've been damaged because we've not stored them correctly. Or we've not got the right fittings, or we can't find bits. And again, generally the sort of things that you're looking at. Again, assortment of change parts. We don't know what we want. And as you can see there, what we've got there is a restoration plan, or part of the restoration plan, in terms of how do we bring this poor standard to a as good as new standard. And the other thing, as I will mention, is that this machine was at least 15 years old, maybe even 20 years old. Okay. And there was a very good business reason why we needed to do something and refurbish it, okay, and not be jumping out and saying we need to buy a new piece of equipment. So this is just some of the stuff they've done. And you'll now see the Kanban consumables area there, change parts, located, labeled, good condition, equipment, replaced, not replacing with non-standard parts, putting the right parts in, as opposed to the behavior which was, we'll put something in just to keep it going, because they'd never go back and actually do the job properly. If you're going to do a job, do it properly. There's just a couple of examples. And the interesting thing is that the figures that we got literally the week or the couple of weeks before I left, week commencing the 13th, is we hit 74% OEE, and we maintain that performance. I know they are sustaining that, but if you look based on this thing in the corner here, at 50% OEE, which we were achieving for 103 hours manned, that's 51 productive hours. 74 gives us 76 productive hours per week. That's a benefit of 25 productive hours, or 1,250 per year. Importantly, that 25 productive hours per week will give us an additional 125 cases per annum. Okay? That's a considerable benefit from a relatively short piece of work. And the final picture is when I left, they bought me the local football team top. And this thing I've got in my hand here, that's my granddaughter there. Obviously we're Evertonians, our family, but there's me with a Hurley, whatever I'm supposed to do with that. And it was great. So questions, or what can you do as a result of what you've heard today? So 3 things would be: assess how well your strategy deployment or your tier management system is, and how well it is at creating ownership. Is it ticking the box, or is it really doing what it should do? And examine your problem solving systems to make sure you're solving problems at the right level. Are we really making sure that we've got the experts involved, or are we trying to solve problems for people? Okay. And the third question is, do you accept poor standards in your organization? And what are you doing to address why? Why do we continue to accept and walk past poor standards every day and not challenge them? So there's 3 things to think about. That's it from me this afternoon. I hope you found this interesting. Over to you, Jordan.
Thanks so much for that, Andy. It was a great session. Just a reminder, everybody, this is a weekly series, and next week we welcome in Nick Taylor for his session on bringing a vision to life. We'll be the same time next Wednesday, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Again, thank you again, Andy.
Pleasure.